The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, February 17th, Martyrs of China. It seems that Christianity was first preached in China in the 7th century in the form of the Nestorian heresy. The first Catholic mission in the West was established in 1294 in Canbalic, Peking. The founder was a Franciscan friar from Montecorvino. The first permanent missions were those of the Jesuits, established during the 16th and 17th centuries. In 1631, the Dominicans arrived, and 2 years later, the Franciscans. In 1680, the Friars of St. Augustine came, and in 1683, the Fathers of the Paris Foreign Missions, who established a foundation that has survived all persecutions and difficulties. In 1900 and 1909, several martyrs of the missions of China were beatified, 2 of whom died for Christ in the month of February. The life of Blessed Francis de Clet was of such splendid heroism, and was crowned by such a cruel martyrdom at the age of 72, that it is necessary to dedicate a few words to him. The martyr was born in Grenoble in 1748, and at the age of 21 he entered the congregation of the mission, Lazarists. After a short period of teaching theology in Annecy, Father Clet became Master of Novices at Saint Lazare in Paris in 1788. In the turbulent time of the Revolution, it was difficult to send missionaries to the Far East on a regular basis. In 1791, an opportunity arose to obtain passage for 2 missionaries to China. When one of them was unable to leave, Father Clet gladly took his place. He landed in Macau, and from there succeeded in getting into the empire after overcoming many difficulties. It would take too long to describe all the obstacles that Father Clet had to overcome in the 30 years he spent in China. Apart from the difficulty of the language, which he was never able to master completely, since he had begun to learn it at the age of 40. The district which fell to his lot aroused the suspicion of the emperor for having shown himself disaffected to the crown and even rebellious. The soldiers made frequent inspections there. For long periods, the life of the missionary was like the one described in the Epistle to the Hebrews. They wandered about, clothed in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, distressed and afflicted. The few priests in the vast province of Hukuang died or fell into the hands of the persecutors. Father Clet lived for 3 years absolutely alone. Communications were very difficult, and many of his letters to his superiors in Europe were lost. The missionary's health broke down because of the climate and the terrible hardships. The few Christians of the place loved him very much, and he had the consolation of witnessing repeatedly the extraordinary constancy of his children in the face of the worst torments and brutalities. In 1818, a period of more serious persecution began. One morning, a strange and inexplicable phenomenon occurred in Peking that darkened the bright and clear sky for a few hours. The emperor became alarmed, and although he had hitherto been tolerant of Christians, he allowed himself to be persuaded by some bad advisers that the local divinities were angry and that foreign religions had to be suppressed. A decree was issued which affected a vast region. Father Clet managed at first to escape the persecutors, but at last, through the wickedness of a pagan who wanted to take revenge on a convert, and through the treachery of a Christian who handed over the missionary for 1,000 taels, he fell into the hands of his enemies. He had to endure flogging, confinement in a solitary dungeon, hunger, thirst, and other horrible forms of torture, particularly cruel for a man of his age. The firmness of his answers provoked the wrath of the judges, who often ordered the soldiers to slap him until they finally condemned him to be strangled. This torture was not practiced there in the ordinary way, but the rope was loosened when the victim lost consciousness until he regained it again. Clet, who breathed his last when the executioners tightened the rope for the 3rd time. The site of his martyrdom was Wuchangfu, opposite Hankow, the capital of Hubei. It was February 17, 1820. Blessed Louis Gabriel Taurin Dufresse, martyred in 1815 and beatified in 1900, was one of the most effective missionaries of the Paris Foreign Mission Society. He arrived in China at the age of 26, already ordained a priest. He worked for 7 years in the province of Sichuan. In 1785 he was denounced and had to go into hiding, thus managing to evade the persecutors for some months, but he ended up voluntarily surrendering himself to the authorities, fearing that the investigations to find him might lead to the capture of another missionary. He was immediately sent to the prison of Peking, and soon after he was released and deported with other prisoners to Manila, where he remained for 4 years. He returned to Sichuan, accompanying the apostolic vicar, Bishop de Saint-Martin. In 1800, he was consecrated titular Bishop of Tabraca as auxiliary to the vicar apostolic, and the following year he succeeded him in the office. The persecution subsided for some time, and Bishop Taurin Dufresse zealously administered his district. As there were already 40,000 converts and this called for a complete reorganization of the mission, a synod was convened in 1803. In 1811, persecution against foreign preachers was again decreed. There were only 7 in Peking, 3 of whom were working in the observatory. The missionaries had taken advantage of the occasion to introduce themselves through the Europeans' knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. On May 28, 1815, Bishop Dufresse was handed over and taken prisoner to Qintai, capital of the province. It should be noted that the local mandarins treated the venerable bishop, who was then 64 years old, without brutality and even with some consideration. They gave him back his books and allowed him to speak freely in his defense, which the bishop took advantage of to make a vibrant apology for Christianity that moved all those present. He was subjected to a few interrogations in an atmosphere of serenity, and the judges listened politely to the bishop's answers. Undoubtedly, the character and works of the blessed predisposed them in his favor. On September 14th, he appeared before the governor, who condemned him to be beheaded. According to the law, the emperor had to confirm the sentence, but the governor disregarded the ordinance and ordered the execution to be carried out immediately as an example to the Christians. However, the conduct and the words of Blessed Louis Gabriel produced among them an effect contrary to the desired one. When the bishop blessed them for the last time, all the Christian prisoners affirmed their resolution to die for Jesus Christ, as indeed many of them did. The sentence having been executed, the martyr's head was nailed to a pike and exposed to public scorn, together with his body, as a warning to the Christians. But these bravely mounted a constant guard beside the martyr's remains for 8 days, and gave them sepulture as soon as the governor permitted it. Except for experts, the map of China is very complicated, and it is difficult for the ordinary reader to locate exactly the city of Changsha in the province of Hunan, where one authority places the martyrdom of Blessed John Lantrua. There are other authors who place the martyrdom in Changcha, capital of Hunan, and the Franciscan supplement to the Martyrology states that he died by hanging in Changsai. In any case, it seems that the true name of the site of martyrdom is Changsha, a city of about 500,000 inhabitants in central China, south of the Great Lake of Tungting. Hunan, the name of the province whose capital is Changsha, means south of the lake. Lantrua died there, after a relatively merciful martyrdom compared to others, after a life of labors and sufferings. John Lantrua was born in 1760 in Triora in Liguria. At the age of 17, he entered the Order of St. Francis. In 1784, he taught theology in Corneto. The following year, he was appointed guardian in the town of Vallatry. After some years of intense work, he obtained from his superiors permission to devote the rest of his life to the foreign missions. In 1798, he left Italy and spent a year in Lisbon awaiting passage to Macau. From there, he went to the interior of China, facing great dangers and difficulties, since the persecution was in full fury. The missionary comforted Christians of wavering faith and reaped many conversions. In the provinces of Hubei and Hunan, he had to work almost alone. Finally, he was denounced to the authorities who apprehended him, burned his chapel, and confiscated all his belongings. The missionary answered the questions of the judges with the boldness and resolution of the ancient martyrs. The authorities referred him to a court of higher jurisdiction, forcing him to make a long and arduous journey, during which the blessed obtained that his fellow prisoners be transported by litter. Transferred to Changsha prison, he spent 6 months there in the most intolerable conditions imaginable, with chains around his neck, hands, and feet. The executioners forcibly dragged him over a crucifix so that the Christians would believe that he had desecrated it, but the blessed man protested loudly, claiming that his action had not been voluntary. The judges had no choice but to condemn him to death. Before the execution, the blessed man prayed fervently in public, gave all the money he had to the executioners so that they would not undress him, and he died strangled. His body was exposed in an infamous manner. The martyrdom took place on February 7, 1816. Among the last martyrs is Blessed Auguste Chapdelaine, executed on February 27, 1856. He was born in 1814 near Coutances, France. His parents, who had 9 children, worked as a family on a small farm they owned. Auguste distinguished himself from his youth by his piety and generosity. In farm work he worked for 4. Il faisait de la besogne pour 4. Death took away 2 of his brothers. This reduced the number of arms in the work, and finally the family was forced to divide up the property. Thus Auguste was able to satisfy his desire to embrace the priesthood. In 1844 he was appointed parish priest, and his zeal worked wonders among his parishioners. In 1851 he felt called to the foreign missions, and after a short period of preparation at the Foreign Missions House in Paris, he left for China. After 1,000 dangerous adventures, he arrived at the place to which his superiors had sent him. In December 1854, he was denounced to the mandarin of the region by the zealous relative of a convert. He was arrested and spent some anxious days in prison, but the mandarin was kind and did him no harm. Chapdelaine returned with greater impetus to apostolic work and achieved many conversions in spite of his imperfect knowledge of the language. But sometime later, a new mandarin replaced the first. Chapdelaine was denounced a second time and taken prisoner, along with some of his Christians. His courageous answers provoked the wrath of the judges, who condemned him to be beaten. The martyr was half-deaf as a result of the punishment, but he did not let slip a complaint nor a protest, and a day or 2 later he miraculously recovered. Believing that his cure was due to magic, the mandarin had the blessed man bathed in the blood of a dog to nullify the spell. The second time that Father Chapdelaine appeared before the judges, he was condemned to receive 300 blows in the face with a kind of heavy leather sole. In the torture, he lost several teeth and suffered the fracture of his jaw. At last, the judges gave him to understand that they would let him go free for 1,000 taels, or even for 300, but the Christians could not raise that sum. So the judges condemned him to die slowly in a cage. The executioners decapitated the martyr after death, and it is said that 3 streams of blood gushed from his neck, which convinced all present that there was something extraordinary about him. Among the other martyrs, beatified in 1900 and 1909, are the layman Peter Leu, who was strangled for having gone to encourage his sons in prison, 1834, Paul Leu, 1818, and John Baptist Lowe, 1861, the catechist Jerome Leu, 1858, and the seminarian Joseph Shang, 1861. Jean-Pierre Niel, a French priest, was beheaded in 1862 along with Martin. His Chinese catechist Agnes Sao Kui was martyred in Guangshi, 1856, and the school teacher Agatha Lin was beheaded in Maocan in 1858. Other Chinese martyrs were Blessed Francisco de Capillas, see February 15th, Pedro Sanz and his companions, see May 26th, Gregorio Grassi and his companions, see July 9th, and Juan Perboire, see September 11th.